I am Jonathan Methestein. I am the Executive Director at California Common Cause, and I am so pleased that you are joining us here today for this special webinar for California Common Cause members. In this vitally important election year, with control of the White House and both houses of Congress hanging in the balance, and with our democracy seemingly under threat, we have to remember that what makes the machinery of our elections work is regular people. And by that, I mean elections officials, regular members of our community who've always taken on a hard job because of their love of democracy and of civic participation. But increasingly, elections officials are doing truly courageous and vitally necessary work in the face of threats, harassment, and abuse. Today, being an elections official is harder than ever before. Elections officials have always had to do millions of tasks that no one would ever see or understand and do them perfectly. I've had the opportunity over 10 years of being a voting rights attorney to see some of the work that elections officials do behind the scenes, out of public view, and the complexity of the work is astronomical. And today, in addition to doing all of that work that you had to do before, you have to also be a cybersecurity expert, a crisis communications master, a fact checker, and essentially a warrior for democracy. And you have to do all of that with lies circulating that you are rigging elections, that voter fraud is rampant, and that maybe you're part of deep state plots. And if you think that these challenges are true for elections officials elsewhere, but not in California, I'd like to introduce you to Cathy Darling Allen. If we could bring Cathy onto the stage, that would be fabulous. For 20 years, Cathy Darling Allen has served as the Shasta County Clerk and Registrar of Voters, retiring earlier this year. She lives in Redding with her husband and her granddaughter. Hi, Cathy. In her career, Cathy oversaw the administration of 41 elections and counted more than 1.7 million votes. Cathy administered elections using electronic voting, paper ballot voting, and steered Shasta County elections through major changes in California election law and regulations. Cathy has always been an active member of the voting rights and election administration community. For example, she was the president of California's Association of Clerks and Elections Officials from 2012 to 2014. And as a result, I've had the opportunity and the pleasure of working with Cathy for over 10 years. But it was really the last few years where things have gotten dramatically more difficult in Shasta County. In the big lie era, in which some believe that any election that does not turn out their way was rigged or rife with fraud, several members of the Shasta County Board of Supervisors and their supporters made Cathy's life miserable with unfounded attacks on her staff, and her work, rooted in internet conspiracy and disinformation. Cathy persevered and always did her work with integrity and with grace. And upon Cathy's retirement, today we are lucky enough to hear directly from her about her experience as she concludes her career in elections. So I will be in conversation with Cathy over the next 20 to 30 minutes. And I would invite you to put your questions for Cathy in the Q&A box throughout today's conversation. And then our staff will facilitate a question and answer period at the end of the conversation. Thank you again for joining us. And Cathy, welcome.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. Great to be here.
Okay, so every elections official I've ever had the pleasure of meeting or working with has felt deeply connected to their work and found it extremely rewarding. No one is just doing a job. So what originally ignited your love affair with elections?
I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and my mom was really politically active in local politics, school board races in particular, were something she worked on a lot when I was growing up. And, you know, when you live in D.C., your local paper is the Washington Post. The local news is what's happening in the White House. So I think I grew up, like a lot of kids in my neck of the woods, with a kind of higher than normal political awareness. I came to work at the elections department in 2003 after working at the welfare department here in Shasta County. And I really just fell in love with the work. When I was training with I originally started as the assistant county clerk, and my predecessor told me elections are never boring. And she was right. They are not boring almost ever. The laws change almost every year in one way or another around how we create ballots or serve voters. It's very demanding work, always has been very challenging work, but also super rewarding. What we do every day matters. And that's a wonderful way to be able to make a living.
Yeah, agreed. So before all the conspiracies and the disinformation and the big lie stuff took hold in Shasta County, your job was really, really different. And let's just talk a little bit about how things have changed over time. Back then, what were the biggest challenges involved in administering elections?
They would, as I just said, they would vary, right? Election to election. What the biggest challenge was, always we were struggling for recruiting poll workers. That was one of the things that we spent a lot of time doing. And believe it or not, um, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, one of the things we also struggled to do was recruit observers to come watch the process and be our witness, which provides an extra layer of security to the process to have folks in the office watching. That's changed dramatically, as we're going to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. And back then, what was the most rewarding piece of your job?
A lot of people don't know that county clerks are also the commissioner of civil marriage in California. So marriage equality was a huge milestone that we were all very privileged to be a part of over the last decade or two. And I was really honored to perform ceremonies for same-sex couples here in Shasta County, especially in 2008 when we had that window. We married couples, many couples who had been together for decades and never had the benefit of a legal recognition of their union. And so we were thrilled to be able to do that for folks. We had people drive down from Oregon. We had people from other counties around us who declined to perform marriage ceremonies in some cases during that time period. We were just really pleased to be able to provide that recognition of equality and equity to folks who had been denied it for so long. On the election side, like I said, just in generally doing work that matters was always its own reward in a lot of ways.
Yeah. How well known you became over time, very well known in Shasta County, and in ways you probably didn't love. But let me just ask you, back then, before all this started, how well known were you? How many people in the community knew who you were?
I really was very much a silent bureaucrat in the background for most of my career, probably for the first 16 of the 20 years that I served as county clerk. I could go to the grocery store or go out to dinner or lunch or shopping at Costco, and no one would recognize me or comment to me. It was very unusual for someone to approach me in public and talk to me. And literally now I cannot leave my house without having somebody approach me. And I'm really pleased to say that 100% of the time, folks who come up to me and talk to me are grateful and want to say thank you and are sympathetic to what's all the whole situation that's gone on, which we'll get into in more detail as we go forward. But I literally have never had somebody come up to me and yell at me in public randomly, which I think speaks really well for my community.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this modern era that you're in, and that we're all in. The election conspiracies took hold in Shasta County to the extent that 3 members of the Board of Supervisors believed in them, encouraged them, and then acted upon them. They were in a position to make policy based on disinformation and election conspiracy. And it all really put you in the crosshairs and your staff. So let's talk about, when did it begin and how did you know there was going to be trouble?
I think the first time I really got gravely concerned was actually in 2016 in the middle of the year, when the former president talked about the fact that if he didn't win November's election, that it was obviously rigged. And this was before any vote was cast at all, either in California or anywhere else in the nation for the general election in November. Things got very heated, obviously, around 2020, but in our community, Trump won by 65% in November of 2016. So there wasn't a whole lot of controversy at that point. Things changed, though, as I say, dramatically when we got to 2020. And while we felt good about our performance and how the election had gone during a pandemic, we were lucky in California. The primary election in 2020 was 2 weeks before the shutdown. Although the election department never shut down, of course, we were still canvassing the vote early in 2020 for the primary. So we kept going to work because we had to. although we didn't have anywhere to go for lunch, right? Everything was closed. But things got really dicey because of the shutdown. I think COVID was really a bellwether for all of us, right? It had a national and worldwide effect. I think we're all still recovering to some degree. But we had some people in our community who really embraced some extreme conspiracy theories, like, as you say, around voting. And the June 2022 election turned out to be a much more controversial than any of us could have predicted. And I say any of us, meaning on staff in the elections department. We had people in our office that evening who were extremely aggressive and upset. They, after the first set of results were published, I mean, this became a pattern that after 8 o'clock on election night, when we started publishing results, what feels like a very coordinated attack would start to happen. And this happened election after election, starting with June of 22. But they kept sending out different people. So there were new faces. So I don't think I was not feeling afraid. I was not feeling concerned in June of 22. Now, when I think about that, and it was because the people who came into the office and were really aggressive and harassing us, those folks were familiar faces to me. I knew who they were. They weren't strangers to me, but they also were not people I knew well. And I don't think I realized the danger that I was in, or that most of my staff was also in with me, until later, when it became very clear how extreme some of these folks how radicalized they had become.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me thank you for being an essential worker in 2020 in the peak of the pandemic, and keeping the machinery of our elections going despite the health risks. Before we go further, I mean, can you just share a little bit about, you mentioned you hadn't really fully appreciated how extreme some of these folks had become, and the extent of the conspiracies they were believing. Can you just share a taste of what folks were alleging about elections in Shasta County, or what conspiracies they believed?
The thing that was the most surprising and was new for me at that election was the fact that many of these folks absolutely believed that voted ballots would not be secure in our custody. And for years, we have maintained a chain of custody with all kinds of security requirements. Every time ballots are moved from one place to another, they're in sealed containers. We will record those seal numbers and then audit the seals after the election. But none of our regular practice was acceptable or good enough. And they would allege, we actually had an observer in our office that evening and then the next day, who took a picture of 4 of our employees, temporary staff, sitting around a table that was, and on the table were sealed containers of voted ballots. And he commented at a Board of Supervisors meeting showing that picture as, this is a great example of ballots that are unsecured and at risk. And we had, people are an essential part of elections and ballot processing. We cannot process ballots without people around and doing that actual work. So the idea that, and multiple people, right? There's a rule of 2 is what we call it. So that there's always multiple people handling ballots at every stage. No one's ever alone with ballots. So that we have witnesses. We have, in our county, we're lucky we have a very mixed composition. It's not in California law. Many states have a law that you have to have a Dem and a Rep together to process ballots. That's not in the law in California, but it happens to be true most of the time in Shasta County. We have about half and half. The permanent staff, for example, is a third Dem, a third Rep, and a third nonpartisan. And I made those checks because of some of these allegations. Previously, we wouldn't even have checked People's Party, because it just, California, as usual, leads the way in that election administration is nonpartisan here in California. So that's just an example of, 10 years ago, I used to routinely tell poll workers, you are part of the security of the election. And now we have people saying, you're the problem. And so it's a really dramatic difference, and frankly, based on lies. You used the word misinformation and bad information earlier. I try honestly now to just say it's lies, because it feels deliberate, it feels coordinated, and I don't think that mis and disinformation really is strong enough word. I mean, you say what you want to say, of course, Jonathan, but I'm going to try and
Yeah.
be really direct about the problem, because we can't solve the problem if we don't correctly label it.
Yeah. And to underscore perhaps how disingenuous some of it was, some of the folks who believe these conspiracies actually won some elections in your county. And
Absolutely.
what happened to their belief in conspiracies then?
Great question. If you go and watch the video, then there's videos, a lot of video was taken that night in June of 22. The primary person who I was speaking to is now an elected member in one of our school boards. So, and that was an election that happened in November of 22. And somehow that election was just fine.
Mhm.
An election just prior to the June 22 election where one of our members of our board of supervisor was recalled. That election was just fine. No one objected to that election. No one asked for a recount or a forensic audit of the election where they got the result that they wanted. And in this era now, as we're seeing at the federal level and now also down at the local level, if you can object to the process when your candidate loses, it's just profoundly un-American. The peaceful transfer of power is something that we have accomplished in a really, it's a really huge accomplishment of our nation for the last 249 years, and it's really important that that continue. I really, truly never thought I would be quoting Dick Cheney or Liz Cheney, but as he told her, the institutions must hold. And that is, I absolutely agree. And we have to all work together to get to a place where we don't have to worry about democracy.
Right, right. So folks, please do put your questions for Cathy in the Q&A box, and we will facilitate a question and answer session when we conclude our conversation. So Cathy, you mentioned that our institutions must hold, and part of what brings transparency to the vote counting process, the institution of sort of vote ballot processing and vote counting, is observers. Most people don't realize that in California, anyone can appear at an elections office or a polling place and observe the vote counting process. We at California Common Cause, we often send what we call poll monitors to polling places around usually Southern California to ensure language access, to ensure disability access, to ensure that no one is encountering barriers to the ballot or voter harassment is going on. We do that every election cycle. But we're usually not in elections offices like yours during the vote counting process, though we could be. Anyone can be. Give us a sense of your experience with election observers in the earlier times when things felt a little bit more normal, and in the bad new times where everyone is consumed by conspiracy and lies.
So a lot of existing, well, not a lot. I'll talk about two specific existing processes have been weaponized by folks who've been taken in by these lies. And observation is one of them. It was the case certainly 15 years ago. We were literally trying to recruit people to come and observe because I believe strongly that's a part of the security of the election, the fact that we have impartial outside third-party witnesses. And as you say, California law allows for that. And that is somewhat unusual. There are other states where you can't enter a polling place if you're not entering it to cast a ballot. If you're not a registered voter of that precinct, you can't go in. In California, you can bring a folding chair and sit in the corner and watch all day long from 6 a.m. when the poll workers arrive until after the polls close. And while I don't know that I ever recruited anyone to sit in a chair for 18 hours, we definitely want people around for the pre-election testing, the post-election testing, because those are the key parts for our process that make sure that tabulation is working correctly and that we've got our ducks in a row for an accurate and transparent count of the ballots. Now we had to completely revamp observation. Some in the intervening years, the laws changed and required an official observer program. And so we send letters out before the election to invite all kinds of different groups in to observe the election. All the elected officials in our county get a letter inviting them to come observe, city councils, school boards, etc. Now we literally have to take a census as people arrive during the day and make sure we're not over capacity for our building because we have so many people who want to observe. And unfortunately, some of them are really poorly behaved. They can be very aggressive. They make snide remarks. They are intimidating and harass our staff. I've had one person who repeatedly has screamed in the face of some of our employees, so much so that two of those employees left. Not surprising after being treated the way that they were. And it's really a disheartening and sad thing to see folks, employees who, some of whom come back year after year to work as temporary help to help process election stuff, ballots primarily. In November of 22, for example, we have the same group of retirees that come back election after election. And that changes over time, of course, as folks retire themselves out of the I don't want to work part-time anymore, but for a lot of retirees, working for 12 weeks or so before and after the election gives a little extra Christmas money. And again, it's work that matters, which people really enjoy. In November of 22, that entire group of employees, which is about 20, all wore masks all the time. And by 2022, of course, that wasn't because of COVID. It was because they didn't want the observers to be able to see their faces and know who they were. People have, against the rules for observation, people have videotaped staff. They have audio recorded staff without permission. It's just generally behaving badly. All because of this misguided idea that the folks who they can watch working are somehow secretly doing something nefarious when they don't believe their own eyes. It kind of defies reason sometimes.
Right. And the people working in that office are not political hacks or partisans. They're not out-of-towners who are dropping in to run elections or to steal them. They're neighbors, they're community members, they're grandmas and grandpas from the community who are doing this work on behalf of the place where they live and the place where they've lived for decades in many cases.
Exactly. In fact, some of the leaders of these extremist folks are people who've only lived here for less than 5 years. The person screaming in somebody's face, as an example, that person hasn't even lived here for 4 years.
Right. So you shared a lot of really extreme behavior, and I know I can speak on behalf of the California Common Cause team. Our heart goes out to you and your staff for what they've endured, and we're deeply grateful for the ongoing commitment to running elections well. Would you say the most extreme thing the Board of Supervisors did was cancel your contract with the Dominion voting machines? That happened in January of 2023 and was really, I mean, because of unfounded claims and internet conspiracies and disinformation. A lot of it was on Fox News. It was claiming that Dominion voting machines were not secure and it had been hacked. Dominion later sued Fox News and won a huge settlement because none of that was founded in fact. But the Board of Supervisors voted to cancel the contract with Dominion voting machines in Shasta County with no alternative plan in place for how to conduct elections. Can you just tell us more about what happened?
Sure. And I would say that added piece, that last sentence that you just said, is exactly what was so egregious about their action. Changing voting systems is absolutely within the purview of the Board of Supervisors. That's in law in the Elections Code in California. But making the decision to cancel a contract without an alternative plan is really irresponsible and reckless. And in fact, the maker of the motion during that board meeting seemed wholly unaware that there was an ongoing election in his district. In fact, the county attorney had to stop the conversation and say, hold on a second, we have an election happening. You can't just cancel this contract until the election is concluded. And so they did, in fact, kind of put a delay on the cancellation so we could finish that election prior to the contract being canceled. Now the narrative is, oh, we wanted to hand count all along. That's not accurate. The videos are online. Folks can go look at the video of that meeting. I believe it was January 23rd, 2023. All the meetings are archived. There was no plan in place. These guys just didn't know enough about how elections work to understand that technology was required. We had multiple folks come and talk to the board about the fact that we needed to have technology to give access to our disabled voters. Many counties used that same technology to provide language access for alternative languages that are less common. There's a lot of good reasons why you need technology in elections. And a key component of that, of course, is auditing, which is done by hand. There is a place for that. But it was a really frustrating conversation. And I think one of the things that's most important about it is that they didn't talk to us about any of this. We got phone calls from administrative staff, we got phone calls from the county attorney, but none of the board members contacted me or any of my staff to talk to us about what this would mean, what we would county would need going forward, what it might cost to replace the voting system. And in previous years, we had lots of conversations like that with administrative staff and with board members directly. But these guys wanted to operate on their own, and so they did.
Yeah. I want to talk for 1 second about hand counting ballots. There is a role, as you noted, for hand counts in California law and in good election administration. We audit a small percentage of the votes via hand count in order to confirm that machine counting was correct. However, if you actually try to implement a total hand count in which you count every ballot by hand and you eliminate ballot counting machines entirely, hand counts are more costly, more time consuming, and less accurate than machines. And there's no real question here, I guess, Cathy. I mean, I just think it's really important to point out that it wasn't as if people were suspicious of machines and wanted to, even though they were convenient perhaps, and wanted to do another approach that would make just as much sense, but was less convenient for your office. In fact, the alternative approach was way, way worse.
Yeah, there's some really great examples now out there in the world because hand counting has become a thing that people are trying. Both Nye County, Nevada and Gillespie County, Texas in the last couple of years have hand counted some elections. I believe in Nye County, the estimate was a 25% error rate. Now, anytime you do a mechanical process that involves humans, you're going to have an error rate. We want elections to be, we want that error rate to be 0.000, as many zeros as we can get in there, right? To make it as accurate as possible. But hand counting isn't the way to get there to a low error rate, which means an accurate result, right? The thing that I'm most concerned about in hand counting, certainly in a county like mine that's not rich and doesn't have a ton of money to spend on this stuff, is the finances. How do you actually pay for it? We were challenged to accommodate enough staff to make it happen. But the real on the ground practical outcome is that instead of the pattern of releasing results that we currently have in our community, which is a really big dump, if you will, of election results onto our website right after 8 o'clock when the polls close. And then over the evening on election night, several more updates that will add totals from the polling place votes. And then we usually do an update the Friday after election day and the next Friday. So about 10 or 11 days after the election, we have a pretty good idea, and the majority of ballots are counted. If we vary from that schedule, our local folks know it, and they have questions and they're worried. What's happening? Why are the results delayed? In a hand count situation, we're not going to have any results at 8 o'clock. We're probably not going to post any results at all until early in the morning on Wednesday, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. And then that will be a very small amount. It will not be anything like half of the ballots. And that's generally on election night when we go home, we generally have counted with all the folks who vote by mail and deliver their ballots on election day. We usually have about half the ballots counted. And we have another, so we don't have a final answer in Shasta County on election night anymore. That's just not reality anymore.
Nowhere in California.
I think we're not allowed in California, right? We all vote by mail. So that makes results a little slower coming in because we have to process all the paper that got dropped off on election day through all the different methods. In a hand count situation, though, we're talking about days and weeks later. Currently, we have 30 days to canvass the election at a presidential contest, right? We're bumping up against federal deadlines to make that work so that we can present results to the Secretary of State, who can then inform DC, and we can have the canvass of the vote finally right on January 6th. I'm not sure that if we were doing hand counting that we would meet those deadlines. And certainly it would be very expensive.
So let me ask you one more question before we go to Q&A with our attendees today. So this is not just a Cathy Darling Allen story. Elections officials everywhere are under some amount of duress. A recent report found that roughly 40% of head elections officials in the Western states have departed their role since 2020, okay, in the last 4 years. And other research has found that astronomical percentages of elections officials have faced threats, harassment, abuse, you name it. If you were speaking to someone who loves democracy, someone who loves elections, and someone who might want to consider a career in election administration like you had so fruitfully for so long, what would you say to them today?
I would say a lot of things, but I think primarily this is still an amazing way to be able to make a living. If you want to do work that matters to your community, please consider working in elections. It's always interesting, as Sally told me 20 some years ago, it's never boring. Things always change. And, you know, there are new, fresh challenges. As you said at the beginning, we're no longer just bureaucrats. The one thing that you left off your laundry list of things we have to be expert in is now hazardous materials as well, unfortunately. But that leads to more opportunities for innovation and to improve the process. We believe in constant, continuous improvement in our office. And I think that's something that's universal about elections officials. It gets in your blood and it's very rewarding. One of the things that's happened here in our community is that we've had people really step up to challenge some of these extreme views. And our community, while it is majority Republican or majority conservative, not everyone who would use that label for themselves believes these lies. And so many Republicans have stepped forward to defend our office and defend the process. We have some new talk radio shows that are very progressive. And so I'm really heartened by some of the developments that have happened here in Shasta County to push back against a lot of this.
Thank you so much, Cathy, for sharing your experience with us and sharing your wisdom with us. Alex, I'm going to invite you to join us on stage here. Alex Leal Silva is the Operations and Development Associate for California Common Cause, and she's going to be taking questions from the audience and presenting them to Cathy. Take it away.
Yes, I am. I will also take a moment to selfishly promote our podcast, Democracy Is, if you're interested in learning about a host of the democracy issues seen here today. But with that, thank you all so much for your questions. So I'm just looking through them and have found some that have a lot of similar themes. So, Cathy, there seems to be a lot of concern around some of this disturbing behavior towards poll workers or poll monitors. Is there anything that can be done to protect poll workers? And is there any sort of like pending legislation or local initiatives to protect poll workers who are serving their community?
In 2022, Colorado passed a really comprehensive package of election reform bills aimed at protecting the process from within and from observers and other folks involved in the process. And I know there's conversation in Sacramento about adopting similar measures here in California. There's actually one bill in particular that's already moving through the process. So I think there are definitely things that can be done, but it needs to be done, I believe, at the state level, not just local ordinances. We need the power of the state behind those rules and regulations in order to make sure that folks really are genuinely protected.
Thank you so much. Another question that we saw pop up a lot was around the future registrar of voters in Shasta County. Are you at all nervous? And is there anything that the community can do to advocate for someone who's as dedicated to elections as you are?
So the assistant county clerk, Joanna Francesca, is applying for the job. They're going to have interviews in a couple of weeks in a board meeting, I think several days of interviews. Folks who want to support Joanna's application, as I do, can email the Board of Supervisors. They can go to the board meetings and make public comment about that. There's a very easy contact button on the Board of Supervisors website. If you just Google email the Shasta County Board of Supervisors, you'll find that. I think that's a really great way to ensure that the good work that Joanna and I did together for the 16 years she's worked for the department continues.
Wonderful. You also spoke a lot about how a lot of the elections officials and poll workers are everyday community members. And I think, Jonathan, you said local grandmas and grandpas. But we have a question in the chat of how can we engage younger voters into the election process and get them involved in these roles?
So, that's a question, the $64 million question, right? That we've been talking about in elections for decades. How do we get the 18 to 24-year-olds to vote, much less be poll workers? California has a great high school poll worker training program that is sponsored by both the Secretary of State and the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, which is a great way to engage kids before they even are eligible to vote themselves. So I would encourage, if you know young people, make sure you talk to them about voting. I've read several studies that really speak to influencers and trusted messengers to get people to vote. And for example, in the Asian community, some Asian communities, and in the Hispanic communities, if your mom votes, you're a voter, right? That's been borne out by research. So talking to young people in your family that you interact with on a regular basis, the kid that's bagging your groceries at the grocery store, ask them if they vote. Ask them who they would vote for if they had the chance to vote in November. Opening that conversation, I think, is a great way to engage young people. And then we will have a bigger pool of young people to pull as poll workers as well.
Great. Another big theme that I saw from some of the questions was about what we can do as everyday community members to support our poll workers and our election officials in this age of misinformation and fear that's being put onto officials like yourself.
One of the things that happened over the last couple of years that was an amazing silver lining for the whole office was the amount of contact we had with the public. People walking by the office would literally just open the door and say, "Hey, thank you guys, you're awesome. Don't listen to the haters," and shut the door and keep walking. People would send us emails. People dropped off cookies and flowers, and all kinds of people sent cards and letters. Just really was an awesome thing for the office. I hope it's still happening. I hope it's not just centered around me, because it's a really encouraging thing. When you go to vote, make sure you say thank you to the poll workers for serving. We have had occasions in our community where specific observers have gone to polling places to harass neighbors they don't like. It's really ridiculous what behavior has become acceptable. I'm sure we've all experienced that in one way or another in the last 5 years. But you can be the answer to that by being kind, thanking your poll workers, reaching out to your local election official and telling them how much you appreciate the work that they're doing. The harassment and the intimidation is not going to stop. In this November election, I am assuming that we're going to see this behavior continue for some time, unfortunately. So it's really that kind of, you don't know me, but I appreciate your work. That message is amazing to get. And I would encourage folks to do that every election, and even not on election day, right? Election departments are at work every single day, maintaining the voter file, cleaning up election records. That's a work that continues every single day of the year. So it's really appreciated when folks reach out.
Amazing. And if I can, this is not a question, but a comment that was made that I really want to highlight. It says, I lived in Shasta County from 2015 to 2020 and knew Cathy's name, but like most of us, just took for granted that good people did this important work and the rest of us didn't have to worry about it. Thank you so much, Cathy, for especially the last half decade when you've endured personal risk for absurd reasons. So I just wanted to highlight that one. But thank you all so much for your questions. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you all for your questions today. Cathy, we want to close with a surprise for you. I am going to invite Mindy Romero to join us on stage. Mindy Romero is, in her day job, the director of the Center for Inclusive Democracy at USC and California's primary researcher on the subject of our electorate. But she's also the board chair of California Common Cause and a friend to democracy and elections officials everywhere. So Mindy, I'm going to hand it over to you for this last piece of our program today.
Thank you, Jonathan, very much. Cathy, what do I say? You are a champion, yes, of our democracy. Are you already getting emotional? No, okay. A champion of our democracy, but you are also a democracy hero of the highest level. What you have done, not only for your community, but what you have done for the state of California, and really, it's not an exaggeration to say for our nation. Our democracy, the continuation of our democracy, the strength of our democracy depends on the strength, the dignity, the integrity, and the hard work, right, of every individual jurisdiction, the leadership in every individual jurisdiction. But you haven't just worked in Shasta, right? You've also literally been a national story, holding the fort and fighting back against those that want to hurt your local elections and also set a precedent, right, for other jurisdictions around the country. So what you've done in Shasta is amazing. But you've also at a personal level inspired so many people. I have heard other election officials that you've literally mentored, connected with, other advocates in the field that you've been a friend to, right? Colleague and friend, and so many others, and me as well, personally. Just living by the values that you live by and standing up and being action as well as beliefs. It's just been incredible. And anyway, I could go on and on. This award that we want to present to you is just a token of our appreciation and for an appreciation for the field. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Democracy Hero Award. And oh, that's great. There's a great image of it there. So again, it's a token, but we hope that you can put it on a shelf, on a desk, in your garage, wherever, and feel very proud that it's just one more recognition of everything that you have achieved. We know you're leaving your official role, but we hope to see you in many other places. Heroes don't just quietly retire. And we just want you to take care of yourself and get a good break before you jump back into whatever you're going to jump back into in the field in some way, I'm sure. And I'll stop there. But thank you so much, Cathy, for everything you've done for our democracy. And on behalf of Californians, thank you. Jonathan, were you going to say a few words about this?
I was only going to say that back in 2022, Cathy, to celebrate our 50th anniversary as an organization, we handed out a series of Democracy Hero Awards to the preeminent people who have served democracy in California. And we decided to unearth that and to make one more Democracy Hero to recognize you and your long service to voters and to the state. And so the Democracy Heroes plaque is in the mail, en route to your house. It should arrive later this week. And we are really, really thrilled that we could share just a small token of our appreciation for you and for your service. So on behalf of California Common Cause, on behalf of our members in Shasta County, and frankly, on behalf of California voters across the state, Thank you for everything you've done over the years. Thank you for your service.
It's really, really overwhelming. Thank you very much for having me here today and for the recognition. I have known Jonathan and Mindy for well over a decade, and very much respect the work that both of you have done, and very much respect the work that Common Cause does. So it's really a challenging thing to be honored, but I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you.
You're so welcome. And Mindy, thank you for joining us to present this award to Cathy. I want to thank Alex and Alvin, two of our staff members who are operating behind the scenes to make this happen. And most of all, I want to thank everyone who attended today to join us for this critically important conversation. And as we move forward in 2024 and everyone pays attention to the presidential election and the polling and who's going to win the Senate and who's going to win the House, don't forget that your elections are run by regular people, community members like you, who are doing the hard work of making our democracy work. So show your love and show your appreciation. Thank you all again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.